This month, Israel and Morocco have seen a flurry of diplomatic activity, including several high-level visits and a military exercise. On paper, official ties between Israel and Morocco are only a few years old, thanks to the 2020 Abraham Accords, which saw Israel normalize ties with 4 Arab countries. But unofficial, low-level contacts have been reportedly going on for years. And now that relationship is covering everything from security to health and even the possible recognition of a disputed territory. Morocco's health minister hosted his Israeli counterpart on Friday as they signed a deal to enhance cooperation in healthcare. The meeting came just a week after Israel's national security advisor met with Morocco's foreign minister in Rabat. Reports say that Israel is considering recognizing Morocco's claim to the Western Sahara, a disputed territory to the country's south. Meanwhile, earlier this month, Israeli troops participated in a major American-led military drill in Morocco, dubbed African Lion. It was the first time Israel participated in a drill with the North African country. And to further discuss the increasing cooperation between Israel and Morocco, joining me now from Washington, D.C. is William Lawrence. He is a former U.S. diplomat who is stationed across North Africa. And from Amsterdam, Eldad Ben Aharon. He is a researcher at the Peace Research Institute, Frankfurt. A warm welcome to you both, and thanks for joining me on Straight Talk. So, Eldad, what do you make of these latest high-level contacts between Israel and Morocco? And how deep does the relationship between the two countries go?
So I think that we need to make a clear distinction here between two periods. The first of which is the period prior to signing the Abraham Accords in 2020. It spans all the way back to the 60s, the 70s, and the 90s, during the Cold War period, where Israel and Morocco conducted covert relations, covert meetings between the Moroccan king and Mossad officials. And then in the early 90s, with the signing of the Oslo Accords, we saw a little bit of leveling up the relations, not really normalizing them, but opening them a little bit up. And then in 2020, with the signing of the Abraham Accords, the relations became public and announced, of course, publicly, and open new avenues for cooperation that goes beyond those avenues, the previous avenues. Also, we need to consider that back in the 60s, 70s, and the 90s, during that period, we had the Moroccan Jewish community heavily involved in these covert relations, exchanging messages, and so on. And so it builds sort of builds the relations towards.
So, William, reports have emerged that Israel is considering recognizing Morocco's claim over Western Sahara. So what's the political reasoning behind this?
I think the main question is, why didn't they do it already? So there were no really further prerequisites for this to happen. And let me just add to what your other guests, the relationship with Morocco hasn't just been a linear progression forward, but there were peaks and valleys during that period he was talking about. And we had a sort of another upswing with 2020 after the relationship had deteriorated after previously having been an economic relationship. But once the Abraham Accords were signed, everything was in place for the swap that Morocco thought was coming, that with Morocco normalizing with Israel to a higher level than their previous open diplomatic relations that had then been frozen, they thought that they were going to get recognition, and they didn't. One explanation I've gotten is that the Labour government wasn't going to do it. But now that we have a further right-wing government in place in Israel, everything was in place for this to happen. So I think it's at this point, it may be only a matter of time. Although my sources are saying, Israel may go to a full-blown recognition or something short of a full-blown recognition of the Moroccan annexed territory.
But Eldad, let me understand, why is Israel so interested in deepening its relations with the North African country? I mean, what are the shared interests of these two geographically distant countries?
As I mentioned before, these relations build on firm pillars of the Jewish community, the strong diaspora community that lives in Israel, that has heritage in Morocco. And the fact that Morocco took a sort of, let's say, a neutral position in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and wasn't so vocal against Israel. So Israel would like to take a further step in possibly recognizing the Western Saharan Peninsula. But it doesn't happen in an open room. It also points out to the direction of Algeria that was pro-Palestinian throughout the years and it was quite hostile towards Israel. And Israel wants to point out and hammer down a message that now it's payback time, sort of, and there are consequences to these policies.
So, William, Israel has recently sent a delegation of troops to participate in a U.S.-led military drill in Morocco. How significant is this for being a first for the Israeli army, and where do defense and security ties stand between these two countries?
They are deepening in a very significant way. This is antagonizing the relationship between Morocco and Algeria. One of the downsides of the Abraham Accords was the complete rupture in Moroccan-Algerian relations. And let me say that, Morocco was never neutral in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. They were just a mediator. And it goes back to the very important point that my colleague made here, which is that it used to be about a quarter of Israelis were of Moroccan origin. Now it may be around 20% or slightly less. But if there's a massive, let's say, cultural and demographic connection between the countries that was leading to about 70,000 Israeli tourists or more visiting Morocco prior to COVID, which was very important to Morocco during the period when Western tourists weren't going after terrorist attacks in Europe in the 2010s, et cetera, along with the Chinese tourists. So this has been very economically important to Morocco. But the Moroccan population then has been divided. There are those who are just happy about this cultural and economic relationship, and there are those, like the Algerians, who are frustrated that the Abraham Accords haven't provided any dividends for the Palestinians, and that's why, we have 6 states that have normalized with Israel, but not more yet.
So, Eldad, how are regional countries reacting to Israel's possible move on recognizing Morocco's claim over Western Sahara? How would Algeria react to it?
They're not really comfortable with this possibility for quite obvious reasons, because Israel sends a clear message, signals that it backs Morocco in this complex scenario and this disputed territory. And it hints also that Israel is in a powerful position to do so. So if prior, Israel was, let's say, more cautious about steps like that, because there is a politics in recognition. There's always a party that gives away something, but expect an exchange. So Israel definitely expect exchange also for the other parties of the Abraham Accords, but especially Morocco, to back her up in the context of the West Bank and the disputed territories there. So there is always a trade-off in this politics of recognition.
So, William, what do you think? Is this likely to upset regional balances as well?
Yeah, it already is. The rapprochement between Morocco and Israel, the normalization, did not cause the ending of the ceasefire with Polisario, but it aggravated it because it happened just a month after the war officially broke out again. And Morocco, for all of its diplomatic successes, has been needling Algeria in a number of ways, flaunting the new technologies, the new drones, the maneuvers, the technological cooperation in ways that Algerians have found very provocative. And although neither Morocco nor Algeria wants a war, they could stumble into a war. They have fought in the past in '63 and '78 and had other border incidents, and things could get significantly worse. If you look at the Algerian rhetoric, it basically says, why are our enemies Israel on our border pointing weapons at us? I mean, that's the type of language we see. And so, the question for me is, will Morocco use this cooperation in an escalatory way or a de-escalatory way, and that remains to be seen.
So, Eldad, which country could be a potential facilitator in this process? Because we've been hearing some Saudi Arabian initiatives. Could Saudi Kingdom play a mediating role between the two countries?
it comes across as a possible solution that also aligns well with Israel, due to the fact that Saudi Arabia and Israel has some negotiations about normalization as well. Although, of course, we need to also consider, on the other hand, that there was a normalization between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which could hinder Saudi Arabia's position in this context. But yeah, definitely, I see how Saudi Arabia could fit well here. I also think that United States, in its current administration, that looks quite, let's say, balanced towards this conflict, could work well for both parties as a mediator, because in 2020, during the Abraham Accords, we had Donald Trump as president, and that, of course, works better for Morocco.
So, William, but what's at stake for Saudi Arabia to help broker some sort of an agreement between the two nations over Western Sahara?
Well, the main thing you're referring to is prior to the Arab League summit in Saudi Arabia, the Saudi foreign minister flew to Rabat and Algiers and asked the Moroccans and Algerians to de-escalate and not embarrass the Arab League summit by their behaviors at the summit. And they continue to, I think, play that role. I mean, the Saudis are slow to normalize with Israel, even though they have a robust covert relationship, getting back to what we were talking earlier about the trajectory in the Moroccan, in the Moroccan-Israeli relationship. But Saudi's not ready to normalize because of the Palestinian issue. And even though they're making a number of gestures in the direction. In terms of the mediation, I'm not sure Saudi's the best place for the full mediation between Algeria and Morocco. It probably, like the Ukraine conflict and the Sudan conflict, will need to involve other players as well to mediate, maybe the great powers, European powers, that sort of thing. But Algeria has always organized its foreign policy on the basis of non-intervention, even though it's increasingly intervening in its neighborhood a little bit. And so it'll be really interesting to see where this goes. We had long periods in Algerian Moroccan breakdown, in the 90s and other periods. And I'm not sure the Saudis really have the toolkit to fix this.
Gentlemen, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.